Firefighters of Reddit, what's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? One time had a little short guy stuck with a doorknob up his butt. We just took the doorknob off and let them remove it at the hospital. Another guy during some bad storms stored his generator gas in open 5-gallon paint buckets in his garage. Lit his gas grill in the garage. He and his cat both lived. This man called 911 and screamed he was in an MVA with entrapment and hung up the phone. We rushed to the scene, which happened to be a grocery store parking lot. A shopping cart rolled into his car and couldn't open his door. It was locked. Called medics and turned out that he had dementia and stole his daughter's car. Not a firefighter, but my sister had to be rescued by one when she was playing I'm a Schoolgirl Get Me Out of Here and got herself stuck in a school locker in a contorted position. They had to literally cut her out. The frick is I'm a Schoolgirl Get Me Out of Here? Not a firefighter. I'm a park ranger, but I once had to call the fire department to come and cut a teenager out of a baby swing in one of our parks. He tried to fit in the swing, and being an almost full-grown adult, he, of course, got stuck. They had to use giant clippers to get him out. The parks department charged his parents for the swing and the fire department charged them for a non-emergency rescue. Costco company policy now requires that all safes, cabinets, etc. be locked closed on the display floor because of this little genius in my hometown who locked himself in. None of the employees had the key or combination, and apparently 911 is faster than a locksmith. We cut the hinges off with a circular saw, scared the crap out of the kid, but he was fine. It was Saturday, so we snagged a few free samples on the way out. All in all, a good day. We rescued another kid out of a stuffed animal game at the fair once too. The kid climbed up through the trapdoor trying to reach the toys and got stuck. That was a fun one too. I was a volunteer with a rural department in the foothills of Appalachia, in a very small college town. Like, roughly 1,500 students and about 500 locals. Every year we had drunk students fall off the side of the relatively gentle sloping mountains around campus. These falls were rarely fatal or even likely to cause serious injury. One of the frats had a big formal and we got the call that someone had wandered off from the party and couldn't be found. This is just before cell phones started to be everywhere, and cell phones didn't work very well around campus anyway. Turns out it is a guy in my class who I know pretty well. We go out in the woods looking for him, and hear groaning down the side of one of the drop-offs. Not a far drop, about 15 feet, but sheer sides and no way to walk out. I personally have climbed down this little gully before and climbed back out. It is not difficult, but this guy can't get it together and has no idea where he is. So we have to get the high-angle rescue truck to drive out there with all our ropes and the backboard and other crap. Then we have to get all rigged up, using the appropriate anchors and systems that we were required to use in any high-angle rescue situation. Then we have to drop down there and try to backboard this drunk butthole. The whole freaking time he fought us on it. I'm sitting there trying to explain, hey man, it's me, your buddy, you know me, let me help you. Freaking guy kept lurching away from us, taking swings, and rolling off the board whenever we finally got him on it. It took half of the small, undermanned fire department all goddamn night to get him out. Like, he literally had time to sober up enough to become cooperative. I suppose that's not much of a story, but it's funny because I still give him crap about it to this day whenever I see him. Just an incredibly frustrating, needlessly difficult situation. Not a firefighter, but former paramedic. Ironic that my best story for this is not one from in the field, but is from the air. I was working a shift in a busy trauma center because I was an instructor for a paramedic program, and I had paramedic students doing clinical rotations through the air. A patient came in with a weight from a weight set stuck to his penis. He had tried to have conjugal relations with the center of a weight that you would put on a barbell. I hope I'm using the right term, but probably not. The fit was such that arterial pressure allowed fluid to enter to the end of the penis, but the lower pressure venous return meant that blood stayed trapped in the penis, creating a penis balloon and also a penis that wasn't going to be separated from the weight anytime soon. I don't remember how heavy the weight was, I only remember it was big and red. Insert that's what he said joke here. So the guy shows up in the air on his own, but before surgery is undertaken, The doc wanted to see if the fire depth could cut through the weight with some of its heavy rescue equipment used to cut people out of wrecked cars. So 911 was called. I don't know much about those weights, but I guess they're made of cement sometimes. And none of the hydraulic equipment the fire department tried could cut off the weight. One of my friends was on the crew that responded and I got to hear all about it, as we were all ushered out of the room during the actual cutting attempt. So attempts to cut fail, and we prep the guy for emergency surgery. I'm sure with a urologist, but it was over 20 years ago, so I don't remember for sure. I do know that the surgeon told the doc that the man would probably be impotent for life. When penises get stuck in things that cannot be removed, they have to cut splits into the penis to relieve the pressure by draining the trapped fluid. This may or may not leave the person with permanent impotence, but in this case it was pretty certain that would be the result. TLDR. Don't stick your penis in things that are solid and could trap it. You may be risking impotence for life. Not me, but brother-in-law used to be a fireman in NYC. His worst story was a bunch of Central Americans who didn't speak a word of English had decided to have a pig roast in an apartment building, in the bathtub. Naturally, the bathtub heated up the walls sufficiently that they started a roaring blaze. He said when he got there they were more interested in them saving the pig than putting out the fire. Current volunteer firefighter here. Had to pull a kid from his car after he wrecked it into a tree. Kid was so high out of his mind that he didn't even realize he was in a car accident. He kept asking us and the EMTs to let him back in his car so he could just drive home. While working on the ambulance, I got called to a house for a man choking on peanut butter. We get on scene and determine that the guy is stoned off his butt. He is able to breathe, talk, and swallow without issue. He just feels like there's so much peanut butter stuck in his mouth that it's making him choke. I asked him if he tried drinking anything or rinsing his mouth out with water. He looked at me as if I was the most genius guy to have ever lived, ran to his kitchen, got a Coke, and started drinking it. He looked at me and said, "Thanks man, you saved me for real." My friend's former roommate was a firefighter. I describe him like this, and not as my friend because he's actually a total dong, but he's still a firefighter, so he saves lives. Anyway, I was over at their place one day, and firefighter Dave, not his real name, comes home looking exhausted. We could smell the smoke on him, so we knew he had seen some action that day. We asked him about it and he just got this really sad, but humid look in his eye. An Instagram model has set her apartment building on fire by filling her room with candles for some photo shoot where she would pretend to be doing yoga in the middle of hundreds of candles. But she saw a spider sitting on one of the lit candles, so she sprayed some Raid at it. The room pretty much ignited extremely quickly and, in her fear, she threw the bottle of Raid at the fire, and then hid in her shower across the hall. She was still in the apartment when Dave kicked in the door and carried her out. Her apartment engulfed in flames. She was close to passing out from smoke inhalation, so Dave had to cradle her in his arms. As he carries her to the window to be lowered on a ladder, she says wait. Dave stops, thinking she is about to tell him about someone else that needs rescuing. She meekly lifts her phone and snaps a selfie, making the duck face and everything. Flames in the background. Apparently by the time he left, the Instagram model had posted the photo to her profile and it was already getting tons of likes. From what I hear, though, she did kill the spider, so technically she wasn't a total moron. I mean, we joke about burning the house down to kill a spider, but this be. Went on a ride with my brother who's a firefighter. We went down the block to the neighborhood car show block party, which was pretty cool. They got a medical call and had to roll. I sat in the truck while they and the paramedics took care of it. They come back, all shaking their heads. She took some M and it made me feel funny. They got called back about 3 AM for the same reason. Not me, but my dad was a firefighter and he told me this story once. He was serving on his volunteer fire department up in Canada, and they got a call about a burning car in a small neighborhood. They rushed out to the location, and there was a man, drunk off his butt, sitting in the driver's seat of a crashed pickup truck on the side of a small road, while the truck's hood is on fire. As they pulled the man out of the driver's side of the truck, he kept yelling at them that his beer, which was in the back seat, was getting warm. My dad says that this story makes him sad to think about, but I still think it's at least somewhat funny. Not a firefighter, but have had to call them for something stupid. The grates on the bottom of grooming salon tubs have small spaces. My employee didn't remove the grate for this small dog with tiny toes and one got stuck. After much effort, I called the fire department because no matter what we tried, it would not come out. The firefighters came in and just popped the toe right out. Poor dog, she was in deep crap for it. I don't believe she lasted long after I quit, for unrelated reasons. Rescued a guy trying to surprise his girlfriend on Christmas by coming down the chimney completely unannounced. Her son noticed something was going on before she did, put a starter log in the fireplace and almost killed him had the smoke not started billowing out the fireplace into the living room. I ran into her with a different guy by St. Patrick's. Sorry buddy. 2. My dad worked at a fire station as a medic. He's a lieutenant now, and has a couple stories. Once an older lady called because she had been hit in the head with an orange. Another time they got called to an old barn at 2 AM and a guy dressed in all black came running around the corner, caught his breath and said I think I broke my leg. It was a drive-by fruiting. Not a firefighter, but when I was about 12, I was with my buddy at the park. Being dumb kids we thought it would be a good idea to sit in the baby swings. Next thing we know we're both stuck in these swings and a fire department had to come cut us out. Took a couple hours to finally get us fully out and apparently cost the city a few grand. I remember a story about this kid that decided it would be a fun game to go hide before bedtime and lock himself in his parents' bedroom. After his parents noticed he wasn't brushing his teeth like he should be after putting on his pajamas, they further noticed that their bedroom door was locked. After some knocking and giggling they figured out what was going on. All was okay. Fun and games was now over and it was time for bed. It was then discovered by the kid when unlocking the door that by some terrible odds, the key had jammed itself into the keyway and wouldn't turn to unlock. After a few seconds of struggling, panic set in and the waterworks came. The parents also couldn't open the door despite their best efforts, even going as far as disassembling the lock as much as possible from the hallway. Eventually, after much frustration, the father, who was an off-duty firefighter, had to drive all the way into the station on his day off to borrow the hand-pumped hydraulic door popper. Eventually he got back and managed to force the door open without too much damage to it or the frame. He saved the day once again, all on his day off. The problem was eventually discovered to be that the kid used some random key he found that wasn't even meant for the type of lock on the door. So how he managed to lock it with little to no effort is still a complete mystery to this very day. My family often reminds me of this story. Sorry again, Dad. My dad ran into a burning building, and there was a guy sitting there watching TV, so he said, "Get the frick out." His boss told him that was what they called a city save. Not a firefighter, but once, when I was much younger, late 90s, my sister had to call the base firefighters because our younger brother had started a fire by trying to roast a pickle on a makeshift lamp. Entire thing taken apart, then pieced back together with wire nuts and the like. He still has the scars to this day. 8-year-old girl stuck up to her waist in one of those cat tree things with an enclosure in the bottom. The hole for the cat to get it was exactly the width of her waist, and once she got her arms in, she got them twisted up in such a way that she couldn't push herself out, and her mom couldn't pull her out. We ended up cutting it apart around her with raptor shears, since those things are mostly just cardboard and carpet stapled together. By far the funniest call I've ever responded to. Once got called out to a fully involved 2-story residential structure fire. The fire had probably had time to consume the building for an hour or two before anyone noticed. Residents weren't home, no nearby neighbors. The place was so hot, you could feel your skin starting to crisp up underneath your turnout gear 30 feet away. Obvious surround and drown operation. No way were we saving any part of this building. Homeowner comes up to me screaming and crying while I'm on the nozzle that we have to go inside to save her 4 dogs. I didn't know how to tell her that if I couldn't get close to the house in fireproof pants, there was not a snowball's chance her dogs trapped inside were still alive. All told, it took about 7 hours to put the fire out, and another 2 to finish overhaul and packing up our gear. The entire building was gone, nothing but a few burnt out support beams left. Comes out later that she was illegally renting the place out like a tenement house to a bunch of day laborers and their families and had gotten someone to do unlicensed electrical work inside, which started the fire. It's a wonder no humans were hurt. But I think about that fire and that woman's total disregard for safety or the well-being of her tenants a lot. Spend a few bucks and hire a licensed union electrician. Multiple families lost everything they owned that day because some cheap butt landlord took shortcuts where she shouldn't have. Bonus story. Once rescued a fully grown woman who had somehow managed to wedge herself under a school bus seat and couldn't get out. Had to cut the whole seat off with a sawzall. Bus driver was none too pleased. There was that woman on Staten Island who was in an evacuation zone but decided not to evacuate and ride out the hurricane at the time. Sandy, but in the middle of the goddamn storm, think so I should get out of here with my 2 and 4-year-old sons. Then she gets stuck in flooding and pulls her kids out of the car only to have them swept away and drown. You are going to be arrogant enough to ignore a mandatory evacuation, then at least don't panic in the middle of it and cause the deaths of your sons. I remember that story. What a monumental dumbass. Cut handcuffs off a guy. He was super baked and bet his GF that he could Houdini his way out of them. She clamped them on tight and his hands were discolored. He was yelling at us while the bolt cutters pinched. But being stupid will cause pain. He was thankful. The best part was his GF gassing him in front of us and a couple of cops. Also helped out a young woman that climbed 60+ feet up a tree to get her cat at 4 AM on Sunday morning. First year in the job I had a naked guy stuck half in and half out of a skylight window. Then a few weeks later, which wasn't really dumb but it was funny, we had a woman in bed who was in bed when one of the mattress springs broke and popped up out of the bed and into her butt cheek. She couldn't move and she thought it was in deep, but in reality it was only a ½ inch. And she was naked too. Not really saving a person, but like 2 weeks ago we got a call for a field fire with multiple structures in danger. It was only 6 minutes from my house, so I went POV personal vehicle. Got there and the 911 caller was pacing back and forth and the 2 fires were about 3 inches high and about 2 inches wide each. Really small fires. Structures supposedly in danger were down the road and you couldn't see them when the fire was actually spreading. And this was before we got there. It only burned about 10 feet long and 4 foot wide of dry grass. We just stared at it until it went out, which didn't take long. Then our truck finally arrived and the guys were really upset that we got called to something you could have looked at wrong and it would go out. They soaked the ground that was burned and a little around it so whoever threw their cig in the grass doesn't set more grass on fire. In the 80s, my uncle was a cop and was involved in a suspect chase. The guy jumped a fence and slipped. He impaled himself through the soft spot under his jaw and the fence pike was sticking out of his mouth. Side note, the newspapers in Nebraska actually printed a full color picture of this guy with a fence pike in the face. My uncle had it framed and hanging in his garage. I always have funny stories until I read one of these threads and I blank out. I'll edit over the day and post more stories as I recall them. Here are some in no particular order. 1. Had one lady try to drive through the middle of Waffle House at lunchtime. We explained that it, in fact, wasn't a drive-through. 6 months later we ran the same call, on the same woman, at the same Waffle House. 2. My buddy at the same department ran a house fire where a man with psychiatric problems set fire to himself and locked himself in the bedroom. The fireman made a push into the house and found him sitting on his bed furiously masturbating. They dragged him out, still beating his meat, and threw him in the ambulance. Dude was jacking off non-stop in the ambulance and at the hospital a few miles away. I'm not sure what happened after he was dropped off, but I'm assuming it was a race between him finishing himself off or the meds knocking him out. Not really sure which one. I am hoping for more. 3. Had one lady drive her dirt bike off a 15-foot embankment when she was high as a kite. She seemed okay for the most part but freaked out when I asked, like a smartass, is your arm normally like that? And it was shaped like a lightning bolt. 4. Our station had to extricate a guy's scrotum out of a belt sander a few weeks ago. He was apparently super polite given the circumstances. Not a firefighter, but I am pretty sure a firefighter believed my call to be their stupidest. I suffered a stroke at a relatively young age which caused partial paralysis and severe weakness in my left arm that I still struggle with 4 years later. Anyway, around age 23 my face goes numb, droops, which makes my facial features symmetrical so it doesn't look off unless you know me. I was struggling to walk properly and talk, so I called an ambulance. Firefighter arrives and asks me what the problem is. I am struggling to form proper sentences and think at all, so I stutter my knee, your knee. What is wrong with your knee? I was trying to explain what was going on, but she cut me off every time, but I insisted I still wanted to go to the hospital. We get there and she rudely tells the staff that my knee hurts. But when she leaves, they let me stumble my words enough to explain my situation. Sad, but my uncle told me story of a family from India that had just moved over. They were running an undocumented business out of their garage with loads of gasoline tanks. He suspected buying low and selling high back in the recession when gas prices were shooting up. Long story short, a little kid got his hands on a lighter and blew up the house. Everyone but the little kid survived, but he estimated everyone had 90+% of the body burned. Ohio, 1987. A 6-year-old little boy is at his mom's new daycare. He's visiting his mom in the office. She's the big boss after all, and she has to go let someone in for a tour of the shiny new school. Little boy walks over to the office door, closes it and deadbolt locks it. Phone starts to ring. Little boy answers phone, says standard company greeting. Chaos ensues. Little boy won't unlock the door. Firefighters show up. Little boy waves at them and smiles. Firefighters have to break down door. Little boy hugs them. I was such a little crap. Not a firefighter, but when I was a kid I got toy handcuffs at an arcade, and I put them on myself and lost the key. My mom took me to the local fire station and they cut them right off. Volunteer firefighter. This story isn't as stupid as most others I have seen, but we got a call for search and rescue. The call came out 30 minutes after dark. We got a general direction of north of redacted address, and that the callers were walking along a known trail and got lost. The trail is about 5 miles long. The day before we got heavy rain, so it was all muddy and slippery. The two girls of young age, but old enough to hike on their own, diverted a quarter of a mile off of the trail, walked through a few inch deep stream and onto a small island. We found the two. They said they'd been out for about an hour and a half. So 30 minutes before dark they started hiking, and they had flip-flops on with no traction. The part of the trail we went in, we had people slipping with heavily tractioned boots because of how steep and non-maintained the trail is. I'm still unsure how they made it that far in with all the mud and losing light. TLDR. Rescued two hikers that had very improper footwear for a muddy and steep trail and started the hike just before sundown and got lost. Not fire, but work and M's. A buddy of mine told me a story of a guy who weighed approx 300 pounds and decided that he wanted to lounge in the bathtub, and for whatever reason this guy decides to spread oil all over the tub. Several hours later he calls 911 because he can't get his naked, shriveled, obese body out of the lubed up tub. They had to put a KED, it's like a green vest thing with reinforcements to lift and immobilize the head and neck at the same time, on this dude, set up a tripod, and haul him out of the tub and onto the stretcher. Not me, but my lieutenant told me they went out for a kid who had gotten himself stuck in a tree. Upon arriving, my LT called up to the kid and said, "You know we're only supposed to save cats out of trees, right?" The kid, God love him, let out a long meow. Does it count if they eventually died because of their stupidity? Citizen Dickweed was selling a car. He decided that wanted to check to make sure that there wasn't a lot of gas in the tank of the car he was selling. So, he opened the fill door and removed the cap and checked with his lighter, trying to see down the fill neck to the tank. FWOOM. He died in the hospital. A kid with their knee stuck between the bars of their crib. Honestly, the way the family was reacting, you'd think the kid had lost their leg entirely. Not me, but my father. Once they were at a fire and the locals were screaming the bull is inside for them for minutes. They did not care because it was too dangerous for them to enter the burning house for a huge bull. The fire was put out and turns out the bull was actually Bull, the owner of the house. It was his nickname. And no one ever thought about mentioning this to them. They kept saying Bull. My friend was bartending in a pub that burned down during his shift. From what he told me about trying to evacuate drunken patrons, it sounded like herding cats. People were trying to leave via the second floor window thinking they could jump off of the awning down to the street. Capital S. Also, some chick fell down a flight of stairs without spilling a drop of her drink. One time when I was 7, my sister and I, she 4 at the time, was staying with my grandma. My sister stumped her toe and my grandma jokingly said, "Oh no, we'll have to go to the hospital and have it cut off," or something along those lines. So 7-year-old me called 911 from the bathroom and told them my grandma was going to cut my sister's toe off. 2 police cars and an ambulance showed up at her house and my very confused grandma had to explain that she was absolutely not torturing her grandkids. The officers and EMTs gave me a lecture about not abusing 911 and I was grounded for a while. Not a firefighter, but I recently attended a safety talk where we were told a story about when one of the researchers had set a fire in the lab. The building was evacuated and the firefighters went in and found a postdoctoral researcher still working in one of the labs on the floor above. They'd heard the fire alarm but decided to ignore it and carry on working. Somehow didn't get fired. Apartment fire. Half of the building is being evacuated. We are helping an older woman get to the ground floor and suddenly her son comes up. Tells us he'll kill us if we don't let go of her mother. We try to explain that her apartment, it's not the one with the active fire in it, is filled with smoke and she can't stay in there. He disagrees, gets violent. Long story short, we get the woman downstairs and he ends up fighting with the police. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.